On a quiet Sunday night, May 1st, 2022, Princess Dobbs sat inside her Detroit home on Rockdale Street, talking with her sister at the kitchen table. It was a typical evening, calm, familiar, and routine. The sisters shared a deep bond, often spending time together after putting the kids to bed. Just before 11 p.m., while the house remained still and peaceful, gunshots suddenly rang out. Without warning, a series of bullets tore through the home's walls, shattering windows and puncturing the air with terror. The sisters, stunned and panicked, dropped to the floor. As gunfire echoed through the neighborhood, one of the bullets struck Princess. The force of the impact caused her to collapse instantly. Precious, her sister, rushed to her side, holding her tightly, trying to stop the bleeding while calling for help. Despite her desperate attempts, Precious couldn't save her. Princess lay in her arms, dying in the very home where she raised her 3 children. The moment became a haunting memory that would forever mark the lives of those who loved her. Police officers and emergency responders arrived swiftly. They found Princess gravely wounded and transported her to a nearby hospital. But it was too late. Doctors pronounced her dead, confirming what her sister already knew in her heart. Investigators quickly concluded that Princess was not the intended target. She was an innocent bystander caught in a senseless act of violence. The gunshots were likely aimed at someone else, but she paid the ultimate price. Surveillance footage later revealed a light-colored sedan speeding away from the scene. Authorities suspected it to be a Chevrolet Cruze and asked for the public's help in identifying the vehicle and those inside it. As news of the shooting spread, family members, neighbors, and friends gathered in disbelief. They couldn't comprehend how a loving mother of 3 could be gunned down in her own kitchen, just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Precious, shattered and numb, told reporters that no one deserved to die the way her sister did. She described Princess as full of life, laughter, and love, a woman who always put her children first. The loss of Princess Dobbs reverberated across Detroit, adding to the growing list of victims lost to gun violence. Her death sparked grief, outrage, and an urgent call for justice, not only for her family, but for every family living in fear of the next bullet. Princess Dobbs was more than just a name in the headlines. She was a vibrant soul, a devoted mother, and a beloved sister. Those who knew her describe a woman with a warm smile and a heart that never stopped giving. She didn't just exist. She lived for the people she loved. Born and raised in Detroit, Princess grew up surrounded by family. The city's gritty realities shaped her strength, but her spirit remained gentle and hopeful. From an early age, she carried a sense of responsibility that her siblings admired. She played the role of protector, often putting others' needs before her own. By her early 20s, Princess had become a mother. She embraced the role fully, raising 3 beautiful children with immense love and care. Her days were filled with school drop-offs, bedtime stories, and homemade dinners. Being a mom wasn't just something she did. It was her entire world. Despite the challenges of single motherhood, Princess never allowed her struggles to overshadow her purpose. She juggled multiple jobs, often sacrificing her own needs to ensure her children had everything they required. Her resilience was unshakable, her priorities unwavering. Friends recall her laughter being infectious. She was the type to dance in the kitchen while cooking, the type to crack jokes during tough times just to make others smile. There was a magnetic quality to her, one that drew people in and made them feel safe around her. Her sister Precious described her as her other half, someone she confided in, leaned on, and loved deeply. The two shared more than blood. They shared memories, secrets, and a lifetime of sisterhood. Their bond was unbreakable, built on years of shared experiences and unconditional love. Princess wasn't someone who sought attention or praise. She lived quietly, with grace, always content with the little things, family game nights, movie marathons with her kids, or a peaceful evening on the porch. She found joy in simplicity and never took her blessings for granted. In her community, she was known as trustworthy and kind. Neighbors often saw her helping others, whether it was giving someone a ride, lending money she barely had, or offering a listening ear. She believed in community and compassion, values she passed on to her children. Despite life's hardships, Princess remained full of dreams. She often talked about going back to school, possibly becoming a nurse or starting her own business. She wanted to build a future where her kids could thrive, and she worked tirelessly toward that vision, even if progress was slow. Losing Princess Dobbs wasn't just the loss of a woman. It was the silencing of a dreamer, a nurturer, and a light in many lives. Her memory now lives through her children, her sister, and every person she touched with her kindness and courage. The question now lingers painfully. Why does a life so full of love have to end so violently? The evening of May 1st, 2022, began like many others in Princess Dobbs' home. She had just finished tending to her children, making sure they were fed, bathed, and tucked into bed. It was a Sunday, quiet, calm, a time for winding down before the week ahead. Princess and her sister Precious sat in the kitchen, chatting and laughing as they often did, unwinding after a long day of motherhood and responsibility. The house on Rockdale Street felt safe. It was their sanctuary, a place where family memories had been made and where love had been poured into every corner. The two sisters sipped drinks, reflecting on their children, their goals, and the usual worries of life. No one could have predicted how violently the peace of that night would be shattered. Suddenly, the sound of gunshots tore through the air, breaking the silence like shattered glass. In a terrifying instant, bullets came crashing through the windows and walls of the home. The sisters ducked instinctively, throwing themselves to the floor in an effort to avoid the hail of gunfire. In the chaos, Princess screamed. She had been hit. A bullet pierced her body with brutal precision. Precious rushed to her side, her own fear momentarily replaced by urgency and instinct. She held her sister close, her hands covered in blood, her voice trembling as she begged Princess to stay awake, to hold on, to keep breathing. Time slowed in those agonizing minutes. Precious called 911, her voice frantic, her words barely intelligible. She tried to stop the bleeding, but it was no use. Princess was slipping away in her arms, her breaths becoming shallow, her eyes dimming with each passing second. The paramedics arrived quickly, taking over with expert hands, but even they knew the odds were slim. Princess was rushed to the hospital, her life hanging in the balance. Precious followed behind, numb and in shock, praying for a miracle, hoping against hope that her sister would survive. At the hospital, doctors did everything they could, but the damage was too great. The bullet had caused fatal injuries. Not long after arriving, Princess Dobbs was pronounced dead. The news crushed her family. What started as a normal night ended with an irreplaceable loss.
Detroit police looking for your help right now to catch a killer.
Yeah, so far they've released video of a vehicle involved in a deadly drive-by on the city's west side. Fox 2's Robin Murdoch is live with more. Robin, you were telling us that the way this woman died is just heartbreaking.
It is. Days after this deadly drive-by shooting, family members are still understandably overcome with grief. They say they don't understand how somebody could do something or why somebody would do something like this, changing so many lives instantly.
I'm numb. I don't have any feeling. I don't know what to do, what to say.
These pictures of Princess Dobbs hint at the happier times, the memories that are helping her loved ones push through. The 36-year-old with an unforgettable laugh and infectious smile died in her older sister's arms on Sunday night. The two were more than family, more than best friends. They were always by each other's side. And that was the case up until her very last breath.
I don't want nobody to ever have that memory of a loved one going like that. I don't wish that on anybody. I don't wish this feeling on anybody, at all.
Precious says someone fired more than a dozen shots into her Rockdale Street home just before 11 o'clock. She and Princess were sitting at the kitchen table when she was struck. The shattered glass and bullet holes still remain, signs of the senseless crime, along with these balloons that were recently released for Princess.
They say when they get stuck in a tree, that means they still around, so I appreciate that they still here around us. Thanks. she's still here.
Detroit police shared this surveillance video that shows a light-colored sedan, possibly a Chevy Cruze, speeding away from the West Side home seconds after the gunfire that took the mother of three's life, her youngest just 2. They, along with Princess's sister, hope it will lead to her killer and closure, if that's even possible. Her heartache overwhelming right now.
I feel empty. Like, it's, if you see Princess, you see Precious. If you see Precious, you see Princess. And it's not gonna be that no more. It's just gonna be me and that hurt. Like, they don't know how bad they hurt me.
Now you can just tell from her voice how distraught she is, and it really has been a couple of very difficult years from Precious, who you just heard from. Princess was her only sibling, her only sister, and they recently lost their mom to COVID. So certainly if you know anything about what happened here, give Detroit Police a call right away. We are live outside Detroit Police headquarters. I'm Robin Murdoch for Fox 2 News.
Yeah, Robin, this family needs your help. You know, Amy and I were talking as we were watching that story, and this is just sad all the way around. A young woman shouldn't have to be killed sitting in her own kitchen, and a sister shouldn't have to watch her best friend die. Do police believe that the woman was the intended target?
You know, and that's what the sad situation is, just adding to all of this. Brandon, police are telling us that they do not believe that Princess was the intended target here. And they're actually trying to figure out whether the shooter shot up the right house even. All of that is still under investigation. So just another sad layer to this heartbreaking story. Back to you.
Thank you. Our prayers are with Princess's kids and with Precious. We appreciate you. Have a good one.
Police arrived at the scene to investigate, immediately suspecting that Princess was not the intended target. The bullets were meant for someone else, they believed, but no matter the target, it was Princess who paid the ultimate price. Her only crime was being at home, living her life, loving her family. Neighbors who had heard the shots began gathering outside. Some cried. Others watched in disbelief as officers combed the property for evidence. Princess's home, once a place of laughter and love, had become a crime scene marked by shattered glass and blood-stained walls. In the hours that followed, the world of everyone who loved Princess collapsed. Her children would wake up to a reality without their mother. Her sister would be haunted by the memory of holding her during her final moments. And a city already too familiar with tragedy would now mourn yet another innocent soul lost to senseless violence. The image of Princess Dobbs lying in a pool of her own blood remains burned into Precious Dobbs' memory. In those frantic, heart-wrenching moments, time didn't just slow. It splintered into fragments of disbelief, pain, and desperation. Precious held her sister close, her hands trembling, her voice cracking as she begged her not to leave. Princess, barely conscious, looked at her sister with wide, terrified eyes. The weight of what was happening was evident in that final glance. Inside the home, chaos reigned. The children, awakened by the gunfire and screams, cried from their rooms, their small voices echoing against the nightmarish backdrop. Precious tried to keep calm for them, but her world was caving in. She pressed against the wound on Princess's side, whispering prayers and promises, willing her sister to stay alive. Princess struggled to speak. Blood bubbled from her lips as she gasped for air. Her body, once full of life and strength, began to go limp in Precious's arms. In those final moments, it was clear she knew her time was short. She didn't say much, there wasn't time, but the pain and confusion in her eyes said everything. She wasn't ready to leave her kids, her family, her life. The ambulance couldn't come fast enough. As Precious waited, she was gripped by a helplessness she'd never known. Her sister, her confidant, her partner in life, was slipping away before her eyes. Every second felt like an hour, and every breath Princess took felt like it might be her last. The reality that she was dying in the place where she was supposed to be safest was both cruel and surreal. By the time the paramedics arrived, the scene had descended into tragedy. They worked quickly, administering aid and trying to stabilize Princess for transport. Precious, covered in blood and still clinging to her sister's hand, watched helplessly as they carried her away. She followed behind in a neighbor's car, praying endlessly during the drive to the hospital. At Sinai Grace Hospital, the doctors did everything they could. Precious waited, pacing the hospital hallway, calling family members, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But despite the efforts of the emergency staff, the injuries were too extensive. Princess had lost too much blood. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. When the doctor gave the news, it didn't sink in right away. Precious stood frozen, her ears ringing, her body numb. It wasn't supposed to end like this. She had held Princess in her arms, willing her to live, pleading with God to give her more time. And now she was gone. Just like that. Back at the house, the realization hit her children with devastating force. Their mother, the woman who had read them bedtime stories and kissed them goodnight just hours earlier, wasn't coming home. Precious would now have to tell them what no child should ever hear, that their mother had died trying to protect them, in the very home where they once felt safest. The weight of that night would follow Precious forever. The trauma of watching her sister die in her arms became a permanent scar. She didn't just lose a sibling. She lost a piece of herself. The images, the sounds, the smell of gunfire and blood, none of it would ever fade. In the days that followed, Precious tried to stay strong, taking care of the children while navigating her own heartbreak. The world kept moving, but she remained in that moment, trapped in the memory of holding Princess as her life slipped away. That night didn't just change her, it redefined her. And in the silence that followed the chaos, all she could do was ask why. As the sun rose over Detroit the morning after the shooting, police tape surrounded the quiet home on Rockdale Street. What had once been a safe haven for Princess Dobbs and her children was now the scene of a horrific crime. The Detroit Police Department quickly mobilized, determined to find answers in a case that had already shaken the community to its core. Detectives arrived on the scene early, carefully examining every bullet hole, shattered window, and blood-stained corner of the house. Forensic specialists collected shell casings from the front yard and inside the home. They photographed every detail, hoping that something would help identify the shooter or determine the motive behind the deadly attack. Neighbors were questioned, one by one. Many had heard the rapid gunfire that pierced the night. Some had seen a vehicle speeding away, but no one could say exactly who had pulled the trigger. The suspect had vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a grieving family and a city demanding justice. Surveillance footage from nearby homes and businesses was gathered in hopes of tracking any suspicious movement around the time of the shooting. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility that Princess had been the intended target. All signs pointed to a targeted shooting aimed at someone else, possibly a person who had previously been staying at or visiting the house. But that didn't change the fact that an innocent mother of 3 had been brutally gunned down in her own kitchen. For the detectives, this only added urgency to the case. As the investigation intensified, officers combed through Princess's personal life and social media, looking for any connections or clues. They also turned their attention to past conflicts, neighborhood disputes, and even acquaintances of her siblings. Every detail mattered. Nothing was off the table. Meanwhile, the pain and pressure mounted for the Dobbs family. Precious, still reeling from the trauma, cooperated fully with police. She recounted the events of that terrible night again and again, hoping each retelling would help the officers piece together a clearer picture. She described the suddenness of the attack, the direction of the bullets, and anything she remembered hearing or seeing before and after the gunfire. The detectives faced the familiar challenges of an urban homicide case: community fear, lack of direct eyewitnesses, and the potential for retaliation. But this case felt different. It struck a nerve not just because of its brutality, but because of its randomness. Princess had been a bystander, an unintended victim of someone else's war. Community members began to rally, putting pressure on police to move swiftly. Candlelight vigils were held. Flyers with Princess's photo and the words "Justice for Princess Dobbs" began circulating online and in local shops. People demanded accountability. Someone knew something, and the silence from the streets only deepened the family's pain. Within days, leads began to emerge. A few anonymous tips were called in. Detectives narrowed their focus to a small group of individuals who had past run-ins with violence. Surveillance footage hinted at a suspicious vehicle driving past the house minutes before the shots were fired. It wasn't enough to make an arrest yet, but it was a start. The investigation had officially begun, not just to solve a crime, but to bring peace to a family destroyed by senseless violence. For the officers, this wasn't just another file in a drawer. It was a mission. Princess Dobbs deserved justice, and they weren't going to stop until they found the person responsible. The news of Princess Dobbs' tragic death spread like wildfire through the Detroit community. People were heartbroken and outraged. A young mother had been gunned down in her own home, killed in front of her children, and the entire city felt the pain of that loss. It wasn't just a personal tragedy for the Dobbs family. It was a wake-up call that no one was safe from the consequences of gun violence, not even in their own kitchen. Community members quickly mobilized, organizing vigils, support drives, and public statements to express their grief and solidarity. On the street where Princess lived, neighbors placed flowers, candles, and stuffed animals outside her home. A growing memorial marked the spot where her life was stolen, each item a silent tribute to a life that had touched so many. City leaders also took notice. Local activists, pastors, and even city council members spoke out, condemning the violence and demanding justice for Princess. At community meetings, citizens shared their anger and fear, calling for increased police presence, community engagement programs, and more investment in youth and neighborhood safety. Princess's death had become more than a tragic story. It was now a symbol of a broader crisis. Meanwhile, people across social media poured their hearts out. Friends, family, and strangers alike shared photos of Princess with captions filled with heartbreak, disbelief, and demands for justice. Hashtags like #JusticeForPrincess and #StopTheViolence trended locally. The outpouring of support became a digital movement, uniting people from all backgrounds in grief and solidarity. For Precious and the rest of the Dobbs family, the support meant everything. Though no amount of love could erase the pain of losing Princess, knowing that so many others stood beside them helped them carry the unbearable weight. Community members brought meals, donated money, and offered to help take care of the children. It reminded them that they weren't alone in their suffering. Organizations stepped in as well. Local nonprofits reached out to offer therapy for the children and grief counseling for the family. Churches opened their doors for memorial services. Schools sent letters of condolence and ensured that Princess's children were given the support they needed during such a fragile time. It was a rare moment when a city, often divided by pain and poverty, came together to protect its own. At the first vigil, held just days after Princess's death, dozens of people gathered with candles and signs. Precious spoke through tears, describing her sister's laughter, her love for her children, and the horror of watching her die. Her words were raw and powerful, and they resonated deeply with everyone there. Silence fell as she vowed not to rest until her sister's killer was brought to justice. That night, as candles flickered under the dark sky, it became clear that Princess's story had ignited a fire in her community. People were no longer content with just mourning. They wanted action. They wanted safety. They wanted to make sure that no other family would have to endure the same nightmare. Grassroots leaders began organizing neighborhood meetings to discuss practical solutions. Some called for conflict resolution programs for youth. Others pushed for community patrols and better street lighting. The tragedy of Princess Dobbs became a catalyst for conversation and change. Though it stemmed from a moment of darkness, it had inspired a movement rooted in hope and healing. Still, at the heart of it all was a grieving family struggling to cope with the loss of someone they loved deeply. The community could rally, the city could promise reforms, but nothing would bring Princess back. What they could do, however, was honor her memory by demanding justice, showing love, and building a safer world for the children she left behind. As the shock of Princess Dobbs' murder gave way to deep grief, Detroit transformed from a city in mourning to a city in motion. Residents weren't willing to let another senseless act of violence pass quietly. This was not just about Princess anymore. Her death had become the spark for a broader call to action. From City Hall to neighborhood corners, people demanded justice, not only for Princess, but for every victim of gun violence whose story never made the headlines. The Detroit Police Department responded by pledging a full investigation, with officials urging the public to come forward with any information. Detectives combed through security footage, interviewed witnesses, and followed every lead. Tips began to flow in as the community, fueled by a collective sense of urgency, started sharing what they knew. Princess Dobbs had touched too many lives for a murder to go unsolved. Local media kept the pressure on. News stations aired interviews with the family and updates on the investigation, keeping Princess's story in the spotlight. Activists held rallies, speaking out against the systemic issues that allow violence to thrive: poverty, neglect, and the easy availability of guns. The message was loud and clear. Detroit was tired of burying mothers, daughters, and friends. City officials joined the growing chorus, offering rewards for information leading to an arrest. The mayor acknowledged the community's pain and vowed to invest more in neighborhood safety and mental health services. It was one of those rare moments when officials, citizens, and activists found themselves aligned under one mission: justice and change. Social media became a powerful tool in the fight. Princess's story continued to trend on local platforms, with users sharing photos, updates, and pleas for help identifying the shooter. Grassroots organizers launched a campaign aimed at both pressuring authorities and encouraging people to speak up. The Dobbs family, still in mourning, found hope in the city's response. They knew Princess would not be forgotten. While the killer had not yet been caught, the investigation remained active and energized by the community's persistence. Law enforcement made it clear that this case was a priority. The sense of urgency came not just from the brutality of the act, but from the innocence of the victim. A woman had died protecting her family, and Detroit would not rest until justice was served. In the midst of grief, anger, and frustration, one thing was certain: Detroit had found its voice. Princess Dobbs's death became a rallying cry, and her memory became the foundation of a movement. People were no longer waiting for change. They were demanding it. And in that collective cry for justice, Princess's spirit lived on, guiding a city determined to protect its own. In the wake of Princess Dobbs' tragic death, Detroit began the painful but necessary process of healing. The grief remained heavy, and her absence continued to echo through her family's home and the streets she once walked. Yet even as the community mourned, a powerful sense of unity emerged, one rooted in shared pain, but also in the desire for a better, safer future. People realized that to honor Princess's memory, they had to move forward, not with forgetfulness, but with purpose. Neighborhood groups that once operated independently started collaborating. Community leaders began organizing safety walks, mentoring programs, and neighborhood watch meetings, determined to prevent future tragedies. Churches opened their doors not just for prayer, but for real discussions about youth engagement and violence prevention. Princess's death had brought people together in a way few events could. Precious, Princess's sister, remained a central figure in the movement. She transformed her heartbreak into advocacy, speaking at public events and forums, urging people to speak out against violence and support one another. Her words resonated deeply because they came from a place of lived experience. Through her voice, Princess's story continued to reach those who needed to hear it most. Schools, too, took part in the healing. Counselors were made available to students affected by the tragedy, and some educators began incorporating lessons on conflict resolution and empathy into their classrooms. Children who knew Princess's kids began to understand the real impact of violence, and many were inspired to take part in positive community projects. City officials, facing public pressure and community organizing, promised reforms. Funding was directed toward youth programs, mental health services, and neighborhood revitalization efforts. While such measures could not bring Princess back, they reflected a newfound political will to confront the roots of violence instead of merely reacting to its aftermath. In the midst of all this progress, the Dobbs family received ongoing support. Donations helped with the children's education and daily needs, while local organizations offered counseling and assistance. Strangers sent letters, meals, and messages of love. The community's unwavering presence reminded the family that they were not alone, and that Princess's life had meaning beyond her final moments. A mural of Princess eventually went up on a building near her home. Painted in soft pastels, it depicted her smiling, surrounded by images of peace and hope. It became a symbol not just of remembrance, but of resilience. People came from all parts of the city to see it, leave flowers, and reflect. For many, it was a place to grieve, but also a place to gather strength. Media outlets revisited the story periodically, highlighting the progress made and the ongoing efforts inspired by Princess's life. Unlike so many stories that fade with time, hers remained present in the city's conscience. Each update about her children's milestones or new safety programs bore the imprint of the change she had sparked. More than anything, Princess Dobbs became a reminder of the power of community. Her story proved that even in tragedy, people can come together to protect one another, to demand change, and to heal as one. Moving forward didn't mean forgetting her. It meant building a world where her children could grow up in safety and peace. As Detroit continued its journey, Princess's memory stood as both a warning and a beacon. The pain of her loss would never disappear, but neither would the love she left behind. In every rally, every reform, and every act of kindness, the spirit of Princess Dobbs lived on, guiding a city toward a more compassionate and courageous future. As the city of Detroit continued to heal from the devastating loss of Princess Dobbs, one thing remained clear. Justice was not just a desire, it was a demand. Her family, especially her sister Precious, never stopped calling for accountability. The pain of losing Princess in such a cruel and senseless way fueled their determination. The community stood with them, united in the belief that her killer must be found and held responsible. Every day that passed without an arrest only deepened the resolve of those who loved her. Public rallies continued, often led by community activists, pastors, and victims' families. These gatherings were no longer only about Princess. They had become part of a larger fight against unchecked gun violence in Detroit. Speakers reminded attendees that true justice went beyond the courtroom. It included systemic change, safer neighborhoods, accessible resources for at-risk families, and stronger protection for those caught in cycles of violence. Justice for Princess meant building a world where no other family would endure the same pain. Social media remained a powerful engine in this movement. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Princess Dobbs and hashtag Stop Gun Violence circulated widely, carrying her name beyond Detroit's borders. Petitions calling for increased surveillance in vulnerable communities and stricter penalties for drive-by shootings gained traction. Celebrities and influencers added their voices, sharing Princess's story and urging followers to take action, not just by posting, but by voting, volunteering, and donating to anti-violence programs. Leaders from all walks of life, teachers, business owners, city council members, echoed the same plea. Princess Dobbs's life cannot end in silence. They urged citizens to come forward with any information, no matter how small. Tips, witnesses, surveillance footage, anything could be the key to finding those responsible. Anonymous tip lines were promoted, and local organizations offered rewards for any leads that would help solve the case. While the legal system moved slowly, the people remained swift in their push for change. Families affected by violence joined together, forming coalitions and support networks. Princess's legacy was not only one of tragedy, it was now a symbol of strength. The city's response had become a blueprint for communities across the country facing similar pain. Together, they showed that tragedy, while heartbreaking, could be the start of transformation. The call to action was loud, unwavering, and deeply rooted in love. Love for Princess, love for her children, and love for a city tired of burying its own. Detroit had made a promise to Princess Dobbs that her name would not be forgotten and her death would not be in vain. The road to justice might be long, but the steps were being taken, one, by a community united in memory, in action, and in hope.